Hello everyone, welcome to Better Tech. My name is Asim Khan and I am the Director of Innovation and Technology at TechCell. And today it's a pleasure for me to feature Phillip in our startup segment series. And before we can talk about building a brand, we can have a quick intro from Phillip. So Phillip, thank you very much. Can you please tell us more about yourself and your company Brainworks?
Sure. Good morning, Hasib. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Phillip Alvelda. I'm the CEO and chairman of Brainworks. We are a company that applies next generation neuroscience discoveries to build new AI tools for health tech. And of course, now with the current pandemic, that's a very relevant topic these days.
Right. So that's very helpful and certainly a great introduction. So, Phillip, why don't you go ahead and let us know, like, what led you to start your own company? When you would have started your career, you would have various choices. You could have done a job or otherwise, but you chose to be starting your own company. What was the thought behind it?
Well, when I began building companies, I was a graduate student at MIT. And I was doing the standard circuit of job talks at universities, considering faculty positions at various places, research scientist positions at Bell Labs and Sarnoff and a few places like that. And I kept running into people who were in the process of starting companies. And I think at most of the kind of technology-oriented universities, so places like Stanford and Cal Berkeley and Carnegie Mellon, Georgia Tech, MIT, there's just a culture of not just developing science or technology, but figuring out how you can apply it and have some impact.
Absolutely.
And for me, it was almost accidental. It started waiting in a bookstore for someone, and I kind of backed up to a shelf of books and knocked a book off of it, and it was this book by Jerry Kaplan called Startup: A Silicon Valley Adventure, and I just started reading it, on the way to waiting for a friend. And by the time I read the preface and the first chapter or so, I just, it was like one of these earworms that you can't stop thinking of. And every time I turn around and say, all right, my friends are having fun starting this robotics company, over here, and all of these folks are starting startup companies in Silicon Valley. And yeah, I could go to work for Bell Labs, but how many times in my life am I going to have a good idea that could really, have some world impact, and have a chance to build a company around it? And then, of course, once you build your first company, then it starts to become a little addictive.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say about that is that Boston, it has like that startup flair in the air, right? So there are like
Sure.
like Harvard, MIT, so for example, a few blocks, Boston University from each other, right? So you can basically walk into any of these universities as you like. So what I got from you is that it was basically the environment as well, and the colleagues and people you actually ran into who were also into the similar business of entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah, and I would say, there was a large influence by a lot of the professors at MIT,
Mm-hmm.
where, not only were they professors, but many of them had started their own company or two or three, and then come back to be a professor and kind of, pass on the legacy.
Yeah.
And so that evolution, I thought, really appealed to me.
Yeah, and that's also important because if someone has started a company, right, and they have done it themselves, right, they can actually give you the complete gist of it. They can walk you through the whole journey instead of like a professor teaching entrepreneurship for the sake of just teaching it, right?
Yeah, and they're not like God figures that seem unapproachable, as a Fortune 500 CEO off in some other state. They're the people that have done it. They made a good living of it. Some of them not, but they had fun doing it anyway. And they're just people, and you realize I could do that too. You have a role model, you have an example, and they'll tell you, yeah, absolutely, you could do it, and then they can instill you with that confidence. So it's finding those kind of cultural centers of innovation are important.
So what is sort of the most challenging thing that you have seen in being a CEO? What's the main challenge in your opinion? There would be numerous.
Wow.
There would be numerous, I would say. But what would be the top? One or two.
That answer has changed, throughout the course of my career. When I was a first-time CEO, I'd say that the most difficult thing was figuring out how to lead and manage people who had been your peers. Because starting out, it's hard to get senior people to come work for you when you have no experience.
Right.
And so your best partners are usually your friends or your colleagues from school or people that you've known in some other capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to manage your friends can be hard. Sometimes you have to deliver tough messages, and it's difficult. And you kind of make compromises for the friendship that hurts the business. You make compromises for the business that hurts the friendship, and it's just a tough balance to manage.
Right.
So that I would say was kind of early on. Later, I'd say the biggest challenge, what would that be? That would probably be kind of maintaining a culture of innovation as the company starts to grow rapidly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because, especially when a company starts to become successful and make some money, it becomes easy to do two things. One is it's easy to spend money to solve a problem rather than to be clever and have to solve it with ingenuity. And that's a lazy practice that slowly kind of kills your innovation.
Right.
The other thing is that it's very hard to maintain a hiring standard when your HR manager is saying, Philip, you can't interview every candidate. There's 15 hires that we need to make this week. Please let us do it. And then people come in that don't have the same standard of either excellence or honesty or some of the critical things to build a company.
Right.
And just shaping that culture is so critical that I'd say that's one of the principal challenges.
Right. I can almost sort of relate to most of the things that you have said, because I have seen my organization growing from a startup to a large scale company. So yeah, I can definitely relate to the challenges that you're talking about. So another question that typically people in the tech industry ask about is that what are some of the core building blocks of a successful tech startup? So there can be startups in the technology space which are not, able to do something really well. Some basically die early. Some die when they get to start traction. Some basically make it to exit or otherwise. But the building blocks or foundation for the tech startups, I would say, probably would be some core pieces. So what in your opinion are those cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think let me start by saying I don't think there's one good way to build a startup.
Mm-hmm.
I've now done several and tried a number of different paths, different sources of money, different types of teams. But I would say that, and this sounds a little bit like a cop out, I'm sure, but the most important core part is who is founding the company with you, and do you have a relationship of trust between you? Number one, that's probably the most important thing. And trust both in, are they an honest person, or are they going to look out for your interest as well as their own? But also, do you trust them to be able to do what they need to do as a startup founder?
Mm-hmm.
And so that leads kind of the second core building block is in that team, you really need to have a broad set of skills to be able to manage all the different problems that will come up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where a lot of startups fail, where maybe you have a business guy with an idea and he doesn't have the technology support, or you've got the technology with a bunch of engineers coming out of a place like MIT or Stanford, and they don't have the business smarts or the management experience. Or maybe you have those two pieces and you're missing marketing and sales, and you can make a great product, but you don't know how to make any money from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then of course there's financial responsibility and stock and sales and all those sorts of pieces. So I would say, the best analogy for me was a talk I heard by Steve Jobs, actually, when someone asked him, what was it that you did to resurrect Apple from the Gil Amelio days, where the company was almost bankrupt and they had to take a stock sale from Microsoft to keep them alive. I mean, how embarrassing. And his answer, I think, stuck with me. And what he said is, well, my model for building a company management team is the Beatles. And everyone kind of looked around. What do you mean by that? And he said, well, think of who was in it. You had Ringo Starr, not super innovative, but he kept the beat going, and he was a solid percussionist. Not a star, but would keep the motor turning. Then you had John Lennon, head in the sky, very esoteric, going on his retreats to India and, coming up with new ideas and philosophies and all sorts of touchy-feely kinds of songs and emotional lyrics and philosophical, expositions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had, Paul McCartney, who was like the consummate marketer, who was his thumb on the pulse of the people and what they wanted, and how to, build, write a song that's very popular. And it's almost like, when you're trying to find that peak of excellence, you need the different people who are going to balance you on that peak. And if you have too much of one and not enough of the other, you kind of get dragged off the side. And so, it's kind of the combination and the distribution of skills that, the gifts of one offset the challenges of the other. So that's how I try to build my management team.
Right.
And, when I came back to Apple, we had a lot of bean counters and no innovators. And so we were far off the peak.
That's very insightful, by the way. I mean, the example Steve Jobs used and how you have described it, it's certainly very, very helpful. So what I got from your answer is that the founding team of a startup is very crucial, very important, right? And they have to stick together because they believe in the idea and everything, and then the company basically start to grow. So many times what happen is that that is something practical, that when the startup basically starts to get some traction, or you actually start to get some customers onboarded, you get some VC coming in, or you have some customers who are paying you. So money basically come into the equation at a later stage. And what I have seen in those cases is that the founders or people who you are calling friends are not friends anymore, because of all this business and everything coming in. And many times also it's very difficult to actually keep the founding employees or founding team members, the rock stars in the team as well. So what is your advice to keep the founders intact for a longer period of time till the exit, or keep the initial members with the firm for a longer period of time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, the founders are important because they have kind of unique types of skills. But, some of those skills, they don't necessarily translate into later stages of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, myself, I admit to myself that I love building companies, but once they get past a certain size and develop a certain level of administrative requirements and bureaucracy, I enjoy running it less and less and less the bigger it gets. Right. So I myself have kind of a limited window of contribution that I want to give and where I'm best suited. And a lot of people are like that. Some people can grow and evolve with the company as it changes, and others can't. And there's nothing wrong with it. But I think it's a matter of just being open and honest and transparent about, this isn't a family. It's a business, mm-hmm. And we're trying to help you with your career as you're trying to help the company grow. And it should be a symbiosis. We should both benefit. The company's got to benefit. The individual's got to benefit. Right. If at any time that balance starts to become off, then I think you should be able to have a respectful conversation to say, I know you founded it. We want to make it work. You feel like it was worth your while. We hope it's a good stepping stone to your next position and career. But, for the next evolution of the company, we need something else. Sometimes it's the board and the shareholders giving that message. Sometimes it's the CEO. Sometimes it's a group of employees talking to someone senior. So, all of those things can happen. And, I think my biggest lesson over the years is, how to have those conversations gracefully and begin discussing the issues long before they come to a head, so there's no acrimony or hurt feelings. And you, even when people do exit, you make sure that they feel rewarded for what they did.
Right. So, when you mentioned in your intro that Brainworks is around AI and everything. So, in your opinion, people are, in your opinion, what are some of the obstacles that companies are facing or individuals are facing on embracing AI, right? Or utilizing AI into their products? So, everyone talks about AI, but seems like no one has really mastered it. Or if someone has, then those people are very small in number, right? So where do you think is the blocker?
Well, I think the real issue is that it's complicated. Mm-hmm. And it's relatively new, which means that it's not a mature industry. And what that means when you have a new technology that's not really mature, it means that there's not a lot of kind of infrastructure or systems around it to make it easily utilizable.
Mhm.
So, if a new company is coming and saying, hey, I've got this problem, how do I apply AI? It's not something where you can just go onto a website and start using it and the AI solves your problem. It's a professional services engagement with a consulting company, it's technology licensing, and then 6 or 8 months of integration for the first version. And then you have a product, and maybe it does what you want or not because you haven't been tied into the development of the AI. It might not be the perfect tool. Maybe they sold you something you don't really need. So all of those dynamics exist. And
Right.
so I think that it's natural that the AI consulting industry is still kind of a tiny piecemeal industry.
Mhm.
Um, Now, that's not to say there isn't, successful AI deployments around. There are, but they tend to be done by the companies that invented the stuff. So Google has applied AI very nicely. Facebook, lots of AI applications. Apple, lots of AI
Mhm.
applications. And they're subtle. They're built into products to make things easier. And I think part of the challenge is that a lot of people don't realize, how pervasive AI already is.
Okay.
Even in things like the Zoom call that we're using now, there's AI in the back end to manage the traffic. So I think there's a little bit more around, I think, than people realize. But that doesn't change the fact that it's hard to integrate. It takes money and time, and that's a barrier.
Right. So now as we are moving towards the end, so what advice would you like to give someone who want to make it big in the tech industry?
Oh, well, I think a couple pieces of advice. AI is a really great place to be right now because of that state. You've got very, very powerful tools that very few people know how to use effectively. And it's a huge lever. When you can apply it to solve a problem, it has a big impact. So
Mm.
I think that alone is makes it an area of growth and opportunity for anyone looking for a career. So that's one piece of advice.
Right.
The other piece of advice is that I would give is don't find blinders that focus you on a narrow problem. Because some of the biggest innovations are when you start to get a broader view of what's possible in a range of different technology areas and where you can bring the tools of one to solve the problems of another. And so
Mhm.
it's almost like I see opportunities, like if you think about industries or disciplines that are stovepipes, like can I be an ever better electrical engineer on, an ever narrower aspect of, transistor material physics? Yes, you could do that, but your contribution is going to be very, very focused.
Hmm.
Some of the bigger opportunities are finding the gaps between that and maybe something else, maybe AI, maybe optics, maybe communications. And
Right.
knowing a little bit of both means you can find innovations where no one's looking.
Right. So Brainworks, as you have also said, it's like an entrepreneurial company, right? So
Yes.
in your opinion, like Brainworks, how it is setting a good example for the entrepreneurs out there?
Well, I think the key thing is, we started very much in the, if you've, one of the books I would recommend that people read if they're considering starting a company is Jim Collins' book called Good to Great. And what he does is he distills a couple of fundamental principles that distinguish in several different industries what separated the great companies from the good ones.
Mhm.
And one of the things that he said was, you get the people on the bus first, then figure out where you want to drive.
Wow.
And so that was along the lines of the first issue, where we didn't even decide what we wanted to do until we had the founding team together and began discussing from all of our different perspectives what could be impactful. So that was one. The other is super lean. We're a very small team and leveraging very talented designers and an extended network of supporters and contractors. And we've been able to do remarkable things with little money because we're not that big. So we're very, very efficient. And I would say that, you know, early in the company's growth, you can really take advantage of a few real superstars that don't really need to be managed so much as just unleashed. But you can't do that if you've got kind of medium quality people that you need to manage directly. You need the superstars. And that's possible when you can, begin and be super choosy about who you include in the founding team.
Right.
So it's a you can maintain that for a limited amount of time, but it's very, very powerful the longer you can.
Hmm. That's helpful. That's helpful advice, I would say, for anyone who is looking to make it big. So for people who are listening to the podcast, is there any offer from Brainworks to them, or how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, and anyone can go to our latest offering. You can go to medio.ai, medio.ai, and you can see the offering that we're giving to manage your COVID symptoms with an online web page.
Okay.
And by the way, while you're entering your COVID symptoms, it actually uses AI to measure your vital signs automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of wrapping that all together with a new technology for molecular tests for schools. So now we can find not only the symptomatic COVID patients, but the asymptomatic ones as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested in that sort of thing, you can go to medio.ai/schools and read all about it. But yeah, if you've got a school and you're worried about your children there safely, or you've got a workplace that you'd like to start meeting and collaborating again and want to do that safely, the Medio tools are for you.
All right. So, I mean, in the end, I would really like to ask you, what is next for Brainworks now from here?
Yeah, well, I think right now we're in this weird pandemic era, and so the company that was developing health tech for general hospitals and telemedicine and things like that, we became very focused over the last few months on solving the problems of COVID. So I think that's probably going to be our main area of focus for the next year or so. And knock on wood, we just got some good good vaccine news yesterday from Pfizer. But they still have to have it approved. They still have to manufacture it. They still have to distribute it. They still have to convince enough people to take it to matter. And then we can start to think about what's next. For us, that's probably going to be taking the platform we have and applying it to the next generation of medical problems. Right. But for now, it's pretty much all COVID all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we are right now. Yeah. So, Philip, thank you very, very much for taking the time out and speaking with us about Brainworks in general and sharing your experience from running a company and how it feels like and what are your experiences for being a CEO. Thank you very much, and I look forward to host you again on Better Tech.
Yeah, my pleasure.